Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to the second of 3 events hosted by the Master's in Interdisciplinary Studies and English programs on the West Campus of ASU. I am so thrilled to open this symposium tonight with my colleague, Dr. Claudia Villegas-Silva, who's the director of the Master's in Interdisciplinary Studies program. So we welcome you to this wonderful symposium on inclusive practices in Arizona K-12 classrooms. We are sponsored this evening by Save Our Schools Arizona and ASU's new ARC, or the New College Anti-Racism Council, and we're very grateful for their support of this event. And for more information about our MA programs, I've placed those links in the chat below. I'm going to talk for just a minute about the genesis of this symposium before having Dr. Villegas-Silva introduce our moderator for the event. But in terms of the format for the event, we're going to devote much of our time to question and answer between our moderator and panelists, although we're monitoring the Q&A box. So please, audience members, do place your questions there, and we'll have an opportunity to pose those to our panelists in the latter portion of the symposium. And I've put the links in the chat, but I'm actually going to turn off the chat because I've heard it's quite distracting. So I'll turn that off once we get started. So this symposium is one of 3 events that we're hosting this spring 2021, all virtual, which attempt to draw connections between us as students, teachers, parents, and caregivers in Arizona during a time many of us have been isolated from one another. While 2 of our events are theatrical productions for children and teens, tonight we're giving space to think specifically about the challenges facing K-12 educators in Arizona, particularly how teachers might respond to legislative demands about what can or can't be taught in the classroom while also serving the needs of their students and families. We feel this symposium is so important, not only because those of us organizing have children in Arizona public schools, but also because these issues are so important to our graduate and undergraduate students at ASU, many of whom are already teaching or are getting ready to do so. So I wanted to extend a special welcome to those students. We hope this symposium generates conversations and forms of support for teachers that might continue after the event itself. And I know the event is being recorded and will be available after the fact. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Claudia Villegas-Silva, who will introduce our moderator.
Hi, good evening. Our moderator this evening is Sharon J. Kirsch. Dr. Kirsch is an associate professor of English and rhetorical studies in the New College at Arizona State University, where she teaches courses in rhetoric, American literature, and women's writing. She is the author of Gertrude Stein and the Reinvention of Rhetoric, and co-editor for 2 collections of essays on Stein's work. Dr. Kirsch is also co-founder and the director of research for Save Our Schools Arizona, a grassroots organization fighting for fully and equitably funded public schools for every Arizona child. So now I'll turn it over to Dr. Kirsch, who will introduce our panelists and get us going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to offer a special thanks to Annika and Claudia for inviting me and Save Our Schools to participate in this. It's really exciting to bring my 2 worlds together, because usually Save Our Schools is over here and ASU is over here. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to do this. So I'm especially excited and honored to introduce our panelists tonight. What I'll do is give a brief introduction to each panelist, and then we will ask some questions, and then we will have toward the end some time for Q&A. And like Annika said, please put your questions not in the chat, but in the Q&A, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as we can. So let me start with Kareem Neal. Kareem is a self-contained special education teacher in Phoenix. He has taught students with cognitive delays for 25 years. He's the recipient of the 2019 Arizona Teacher of the Year Award and was recently awarded an honorary doctorate from Northern Arizona University for his contributions to special education in Arizona. He's also on the board of directors for the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. So welcome, Kareem. Next, I want to introduce Yasmin Montiel. She is a fourth grade teacher in a K-8 school district. She has a bachelor's degree in Latin American studies and a master's in elementary education. She aspires to be an inspiring teacher and to grow with the field of education. She's currently working on her doctorate in education leadership and innovation. And she's participating in the Arizona Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents Leadership Cohort. So welcome, Yasmin. And finally, I get to introduce my friend and education advocate co-conspirator, Kristen Roberts. Kristen is a national board certified teacher with a master's degree in education leadership from Arizona State University. And Kristen believes in the power of community and has been honored to teach in Arizona's public schools for the past 15 years. She is an advocate for strong public schools and works alongside other advocates tirelessly to support each other and to support public education in Arizona. And she has been with Save Our Schools Arizona, I think almost from the beginning, maybe from the very, very beginning. So I'm especially excited to introduce you to Kristen. So what I'd like to do is to start with each of you talking just a little bit, kind of briefly, about the courses you teach, what sort of shapes your curriculum and or your classroom practice. So let's start with Yasmin.
Hi all. So I teach fourth grade, which means I teach all subjects. It's not just like one single subject. And I think being a part of a public school district, I do not get to choose my curriculum. You know, my school district is a top-down kind of structure where the school district purchases the curriculum and I'm expected to use it. But how I manage that and gear it towards my classroom and my students' needs is through my lesson planning. So I take what's given to me and I make it fit my students. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to get back to how you make it fit. So we'll come back to that. So Kareem, do you want to talk to us a little bit about your work and your work with students?
Yeah, so I teach self-contained special education, which means I kind of also teach all subjects. However, our district a few years ago decided that the self-contained folks could use kind of more typical curriculum. So my focus is on this year, physical science, world history. But during advisory, I do English and math to kind of keep on track because my students aren't like doing homework or failing classes and things like that. So it's kind of a different vibe because they're with me all day. And as far as curriculum goes, we actually are fortunate in our district. Actually, I'm gonna say in our district in the special education department, particularly self-contained, I've actually been the curriculum writer for the last 6 or 7 years. Me and a guy, Harvey Hart, and then there's been a couple others who's joined us once or twice. But we have a lot of flexibility, particularly in us crafting these new courses. And it was a really cool way of us making sure we had kind of culturally relevant, curriculum and things like that. But the focus with self-contained, particularly high school, is typically on life skills, creating more independence. And so I just trying to fit my world into that because I think my passion is like building community. I do a lot of restorative justice work and things like that. So I love the community building part of self-contained, because the kids are with us for long times, sometimes more than 4 years, almost always in my classroom. And so while I'm trying to make sure my students are gaining independence and also doing world history and physical science and those things, I'm making sure that it's really culturally relevant for those folks.
Great, thank you so much. So Kristen, you are a high school teacher. Tell us a little bit about the kinds of courses you teach and what shapes your curriculum and classroom practices.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I do teach 9th grade English right now exclusively. And like the other panelists have said, our curriculum is built upon the state standards and the curriculum that's created by our teams at the district level. But we do have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of, there's a vast amount of resources that are in the curriculum. You could never cover them all. So what I really use to shape my curriculum is my students. And I feel like it's so important to get to know them, their backgrounds, which does include their culture, their ethnicity, their gender, but also just, their interests, their prior learning experiences, what their families are like, and really seek to try and match not just the text that I choose, but the instructional strategies to help us explore ways to build our skills in literacy, but also, in ninth grade, a big part of what my students are grappling with just developmentally is learning who they are. And I think literature and writing provides us such a beautiful opportunity to explore our identity and to learn how to appreciate the identities of others. So we really try and look at that idea of literature as windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors, and find ways to see my students, to see themselves reflected in what they read, but also to be exposed and be able to step into and develop empathy for people and backgrounds that they would not otherwise relate to.
Yeah. So you walked right into my next question, so I'll put it to Kareem. And that is really just, how do you go about in your classrooms and with your students implementing or teaching equity, teaching empathy? How does that work for you, Kareem?
Well, I love using community building circles just because I think that the first step to doing it is kind of gaining the trust of everyone, and having all students feel seen, heard, respected. And my classroom's even actually set up like a circle, so it's really easy for me. If anybody's ever been in my classroom, it's the students are kind of sitting in like a big U, and I kind of just go in the front of that, and then we're like a circle. And so we all see each other, we all hear each other. And I think, getting to know the students and then kind of getting to know the community better is like the best way of making sure the equity happens. Like I just last week got 2 students from Afghanistan, they're refugees, and they speak Farsi, and I do not. And so we were like playing on loops, like YouTube clips of all the relevant phrases in Farsi and things like that for everyone. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to study some phrases in Farsi so that I can say some things to the new students. It was like we all kind of listened and watched together and picked up some phrases. And I think that's the kind of thing that helps with equity. Once people feel heard, then they kind of give you their true selves. Once they trust in your classroom and trust in their classmates, they are willing to give you the real them. And that's how you then figure out what they truly need. I think a lot of times we assume it. Like I've done a lot of like culturally responsive teaching seminars and things like that, and I've spoken on it and things like that. And a lot of times I remind people, I was like, I think we just assume it. Like I teach at a school where I think it was 88% of the students are Mexican American, Latinx. And I think it's just like, oh, go get some posters of Frida and go get some Cesar Chavez posters and some books. And that's cool. And I was like, no, get to know their community, like take field trips around the community and things like that. And that's what we do. Because then it's like, oh yeah, now you're starting to understand this a little better. And now we can actually say these are the things they need, as opposed to just assuming it based on a race, a gender, a nationality, or something like that.
I'm really struck by what you said about something that seems like it might be just a small thing, but I think it's so huge, and that is arranging the classroom so people can see each other's faces. It really sets the tone so differently, just that little thing to just
yes, and it's so that every student can see every student and all the teachers, right? So like, and I say teachers because there's a paraprofessional that works in my classroom, but every single one of us can see every single one of us at all times, and it's pretty cool to get a sense of everybody.
It requires a kind of presence in the classroom. You can't kind of hide in the back row. So Yeah. So Yasmin, talk to us a little bit about some of the things you do in terms of teaching equity or empathy in your classrooms and with your students.
I think I follow a similar model to Kareem. Mine begins at the beginning of the school year. First day of school is like, hello, welcome to our classroom, not my classroom. I definitely try to make it a more like familial environment. I do the beginning of the year lessons. My favorite one is, the Band-Aid, where I'm going to tell you, you have this specific boo-boo. I'm going to give you a Band-Aid and then carry on to the next one. But they have a different kind of like boo-boo, but they get the Band-Aid in the same spot. And then they realize that not all the same things, not everyone needs the same kind of needs to be met. And so we realize like, hey, equity is getting the needs that you need right now. I definitely do have to introduce those two terms in like a vocabulary lesson at the beginning of the school year. But if once you've established your classroom culture at the beginning, any new students that come in or any visitors to your classroom, you can see it instantly like, oh yeah, in this classroom, the students love their teacher and the teacher loves their students, and there's a mutual respect to it. So yeah, it's just like little lessons like that. I think it's a little bit easier in elementary school than high school because, I see my kids for 7 hours a day and I get confused for mom sometimes. It happens. But it speaks towards how great of a connection you have with them when you build that at the beginning of the school year.
Absolutely. And how important that connection is in a child's life.
Yes.
Right? Next to parents, sometimes it's your teacher who you see more than anybody, and having that classroom that you feel excited to go to is so, so important. And that's why one of the reasons why I think public schools are so important, because public schools are open to everybody. The doors are open to everybody. And so, Kristen, do you want to say anything else about, you touched a little bit on equity and empathy. Are there any things you'd like to add to that?
Kareem and Yasmin summed it up so well. I'll just add a little bit about empathy. I talk to my students and, like Yasmin said, it definitely starts with like a vocabulary lesson on what does that word mean and how is it different from sympathy, and how do we show empathy and what do we do with that feeling, and just being able to process that. But a text that has been just a really great discussion piece for that for us. I've started the last couple years with a read aloud, which I don't think a lot of people do in high school, but my students absolutely love it every year. And we read Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down, which is a young adult book. It's written in verse. So even if we just read like 10 or 15 minutes a day in 2 or 3 weeks, we're done. And there's a great interview with the author where he talks about, he doesn't write this book to have a theme. He writes this book to get you to think about what it's like to be in someone else's shoes and how to have empathy. And so that's just a great discussion point for us. And then for the rest of the year, we can kind of talk about connecting with characters and do you know anyone like that in real life? And what might be a way that someone is feeling that maybe we didn't understand before. So it just gives us a great springboard for discussions.
That's awesome. I love that you read to your students, especially I feel like as little kids, we're used to, they're used to hearing stories and things, but it's like when we get older, somehow that stops and it shouldn't. So I love that you read out loud with your students. So now that we have a sense of who you guys teach, how you teach, a little bit about what your classroom looks like, I want to talk about Arizona and Arizona's ongoing regulation and censorship of public school classrooms. So from the 2010 ban on Mexican American studies, and that was in the Tucson Unified School District, to the 2021 legislation, and actually again in 2022 legislation to ban the teaching of critical race theory, we see an enduring trend of fear and censorship among some Arizona legislators. So for those of you, I'll give a little bit of context for those of you who don't recall that in 2010, our then Governor Jan Brewer signed into law a ban against teaching Mexican American studies. a program that included books and content representing Latinx and Indigenous perspectives. And after many years of legal battles and challenges, in 2017, a federal judge ruled that the state of Arizona violated the constitutional rights of Mexican American students, and that the law that was enacted and enforced was done so with racist intent. So in 2021, last year, Arizona was one of 9 states that passed a ban on teaching divisive subjects, including critical race theory. Now, in our state, that didn't go into effect, but just a week ago, in our legislature, Arizona became one of 36 states to introduce legislation in 2022 that restricts teaching about race and racism. And while there's a lot of misinformation about critical race theory, and there has been for a very long time for a variety of reasons, critical race theory is an academic and legal framework for understanding how racism in the United States is systemic, how it's built into American society. So critical race theory understands racism as more than just an individual's bias or prejudice. Rather, it's embedded into our laws, policies, and institutions that uphold and reproduce racial inequalities. And so, when you, in the university, in an academic setting, we have lots of conversations about what this looks like and how to analyze it and understand culturally how this works. And it really isn't taught in high schools or K-12 schools. However, our legislature is trying to ban divisive concepts and subjects. And the bill that went before Arizona's legislature last week would fine schools $5,000 for every instance of somebody teaching a divisive subject. So I'm curious for you three. You've built careers and are building careers in Arizona as teachers in public schools. So I'm interested in your experience, what this has looked like for you. Have you felt these tensions in your classrooms? Has it affected your teaching or your attempts to teach equity, to help your students understand what that is? So who would like to start? Kareem, go ahead.
I suppose I'll go.
Okay.
So in terms of in my classroom, it totally did not affect even one thing. I've never really taught a one-sided way, and I can't imagine ever teaching something or saying something to make any students in my class feel bad. I would be miserable, right? So I think that's the average teacher in the world. I think that's 99.9% of teachers would shudder at the thought of making their kids feel bad, right, or anything like that. So I can't lie. Not in my day-to-day classroom. I have not thought about it in the slightest because I know I've never presented history or any subject in a way that would say, all right, now go mistreat these people or feel bad about yourself. So I tend not to worry about it, but I have, of course, fielded lots of questions from coworkers and people around the state, because I kind of still travel to a lot of different schools and speak to them who are, they're scared to teach certain things. And I do know, I do kind of like a social justice camp. And there's many like uni towns. If you teach in high school, you've probably heard of them. Mm-hmm. And at that camp, we used to do it, and we haven't gone to camp yet this year, but we used to do a privilege walk. And that is actually in one of the bills, saying that it was in parentheses, privilege walks, et cetera. So that is something that I did take out, because I was like, well, I don't want to do something that is, straight up against the law, and it's saying it right there. So of course, it affected that. But I still think overall, I think it's an outrage to us as teachers, because we understand, what is really happening with that. But I still think that most teachers teach with a clear conscience because we're always doing the best thing for our students, and we know that in our heart. So, so we don't leave school being like, oh no, today I think I really upset blank student or whatever. That's
Yeah.
not really much of a thing. But I think particularly when it first started coming out and as bills pass, more teachers get worried. And I think it also attributes to, there's a lot of teachers who left the profession. Like I saw
Yes.
our midterm amount of teachers who left just our district, and it was 350. And I was like, holy
Oh.
crap, that's a lot of teachers. I normally don't pay attention to it, but the fact that I'm paying
Yeah.
attention to it, I think goes to the state of where it is, where there's just a lot of teachers who, of course, are scared, are feeling like the world doesn't love us like they used to. When
Yes.
I've been teaching for 25 years. When I started teaching, that was one thing I could always bank on. Like if I was like, I'm a teacher, like the world loved me, and now I'm like, well, only in certain places do I want to say I'm a teacher because half the world maybe hates me, right? And so, I think it affects us that way, but I can't imagine there's too many teachers in their classroom every day worried about how they're teaching now. I can't imagine. We are worried about what they're trying to do to public ed, but I think when we're given our lessons, we know it comes from a pure place.
Yeah. So you raise a couple of points I want to just underscore. I think that shift in how culturally we respond to teachers and the sort of deprofessionalizing of teachers and not respecting all that it takes to go into being a qualified certified teacher is, I just wish all of our legislators would go spend a day or two with each one of you just to see what it's really like. But in Arizona, we are 51st in the nation for what we spend on per pupil funding in our public schools. We have the highest teacher turnover rate in the country. A third of teachers quit by their 5th year. Many quit in their 1st year because the demands are so difficult. And of course, teachers are not flocking to the profession to make big salaries, right? That's not it. But teachers want to feel supported. We also have among the highest class sizes in the country. And so when I hear legislators say, oh, we just will raise the class by just a few students, just put a few more students in, they don't understand like what the difference is between adding 5 more students and really then not being able to connect individually with those students. And so I think Arizona could do so much better in terms of how we support our teachers and our students. So Yasmin, do you want to talk to us a little bit about if all of this stuff that goes on in Arizona around public education like makes it into your brain or your heart or your classroom?
It definitely makes it into my brain, but does not touch my classroom. Like Kareem said, I do not let it touch my classroom. I do see the hardships of, like you said, the pupil size. I have a class of 30 and we're still expected to receive more students. Our school district has a virtual school that came from the pandemic, and my 4th grade co-teacher on that one, she has 45 online 4th graders. So it's definitely, we have such a big focus on our kids and meeting their needs that the laws don't even cross my mind when I'm in my classroom. Now, outside of my classroom, I do think okay, I'm going to present this story. One, will my students understand it? I teach the English language learners, so sometimes I have to make more connections than what is readily available in my curriculum. So will my students understand it? And if I'm going to explain it to them, how can I explain it to them in a way that will reach them and, not get me in trouble? Because sometimes you have to work actively. Like I know in my classroom, I have to actively work to dispel some of the prejudice that come from just their normal background cultures, because they're all it's very similar. And so how do I do that in a way that won't make anyone feel upset or feel like I told them that they were wrong. That's how I think of it. I don't want my students to feel like, no, what you're thinking is wrong, because
Right.
I tell them we want to be critical thinkers. I don't teach critical race theory yet, but I do tell them to think critically,
Mhm.
because, you know, fourth grade is about that age where they start developing those personalities. And I want to raise the kids that say, question everything. I
Mhm.
want them to be like actively thinking about what's presented to them and be like, no, teacher, you're wrong. This is how I see it. And so I do try to foster that type of learning environment.
Awesome. Kristen, what would you like to add? Especially because you live in the classroom, but you're also a public school advocate, so you are so deep in all of this stuff.
Yes, I do. I do agree that this does not touch my classroom. You know, the stress and worry, that the chaos and the underfunding and just all of the things that are happening that make our jobs more difficult. My students deserve my full attention and my full heart while I'm there. And, you know, once I'm there, these things kind of go away. And like Kareem said, I would never tell my students what to feel or what to think. I want to ask them what they think. That's what the study of literature is. That's what writing is about, is exploring our own thoughts. And students are just, you know, the teenagers are amazing at, you know, asking, you know, sometimes annoying, but probing questions, you know, to challenge certain things that are presented to them. And, you know, while they can do that, they're also really amazing at listening to one another, at acknowledging when someone with a differing opinion has a point in one regard. And at, like, you know, the end of the day, finishing their conversation, you know, giving each other a fist bump and heading out to have some Cheetos and watch the basketball game. Like, you know, this conflict that we see in the adult world, it doesn't enter my classroom. But when I work with my colleagues, I have talked to so many teachers who are just terrified. And I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago, right before Martin Luther King Day. We celebrated Martin Luther King Day. And she told me, you know, this is in my district curriculum. She teaches elementary school. She said, but I'm not even doing social studies this week because I'm really afraid that people are going to complain about me at the school board meeting, or students are going to go home and say that I said something that I didn't.
Mhm.
And while she understands, she's a smart woman, she knows that that's not what the law says. This is the impact that we're seeing. And so that does deeply concern me, because I think a lot of teachers want to please. We live to serve our students and their families. And this hysteria that's being created is going to have a real chilling effect in our classrooms. It already is.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, even before the law has gone into effect, it's already reached so deeply across the state. And I do think it puts teachers in a difficult situation. And I think that must be, you know, context specific. If you've been teaching in the same school and you have a good connection with your principal, or, you know, I would think for new teachers, it would be especially hard though, when you're trying to sort of feel your way and get to know your students. And but to put teachers in a position where they might feel like they can't even teach social studies during Martin Luther King Jr. week, that's terrible. But of course, Arizona was one of the last states in the country to acknowledge that as a federal holiday. So, well, I maybe you guys have answered this, but are your students aware of this? I guess I would ask it a couple of ways. They might not be aware directly of laws moving through the Arizona state legislature related to race or divisive topics, but just their own sense of identity, their own their own identities that they bring to the classroom. Like, how do they negotiate that with you or with each other, with themselves? Kristen, you want to start? I feel like I keep putting you last, so
Sure.
you can start first on this.
Yeah, to my knowledge, my students are not aware of any of the current controversy going on or any of the proposed bills in the legislature or this discussion about critical race theory that's being heard across our country. Our community is, our students are largely from Hispanic and Latino backgrounds, not a ton of diversity in our school. So they feel very comfortable with one another and with me, usually expressing like their own cultural identity, sharing Spanish phrases and their celebrations and foods and all different things that make their families unique and celebrate their identity. We do have several students though, who might be from a different ethnicity, who might be, we have several Indigenous students, several Black students, a few white students, a few Asian students. And sometimes it takes a little longer for them to start sharing things about who they are.
Kareem, Yasmin, anything you guys would like to add?
I would. I know my students might be somewhat ethnically diverse, but not culturally diverse. They share a lot of the same things at home. Like the other day, I know it's off topic, but they shared the story of being scared of their mom because of the chancla, which is the sandal, which is their discipline method of choice. But even my little Cambodian student, she was like, oh yes, I'm scared of the chancla too, Miss Yasmin. I am terrified because they're different ethnicities, but definitely the home culture is very similar at our school. And in like the Latino or in this case, Cambodian culture, teachers are very highly respected. So when you tell them something, they will receive that and implement it at home. So I know my kids are not aware of the politics behind it, but because of being a little bit upper elementary, they do start getting their opinions. I did start seeing that mostly in the last few years, with the election, and even there was one year where we had to actually stop and have a discussion about the George Floyd death, because they understood what was going on and parents at home weren't really discussing it. So it was my job as a teacher to really discuss the topic. I have to give them the answers. I feel like that's my obligation. I mean, that's why we get paid, to teach them these things. And so the discussions maybe look a lot different than what they would in high school, but they are being had in my upper elementary classroom.
And I think that was something when this anti-CRT bill was being heard at the legislature, somebody brought that up. Somebody said, it's my students who bring these questions to the classroom, and I can't just say, no, we're not going to talk about that. Like, that's antithetical to what happens in a classroom. So I think that's a really, really good example. We live in a multicultural world. You can't just close the door and shut that out. You just can't. Kareem, anything you'd like to add?
My students, being self-contained high school, they're all 14 and up. Actually, I even have a student who's 20, but based on kind of their academic levels and things like that, a lot of those policy issues escaped them. But the topics like George Floyd and presidential elections, that does not escape them. And so we totally talk about it openly. And just because like Yasmin said, I can't imagine somehow being like, well, we can't talk about that. And when you've like, I've taught for a long, long time, and I think you grow comfort in knowing how to kind of have open-ended conversations to allow all opinions their space, and to allow people to explore and learn, which is what we're doing there. So that has not been a problem. My students speak their mind, and then we go. I do not have probably as strict curriculum needs as some folks like, I bet Kristen's is probably a different vibe because, you know, there's testing times and all that my students don't go through. So if we are talking about something and a student say, hey, what about blank? And it's just like, if that derails a lesson for 40 minutes, I'm okay with it at all times. Where I'm never stressed about the pacing of our class. So we have a lot of those types of conversations that wind up being fun. And like I said, I think a big part of it is like we built the strong community, so everybody kind of respects each other's opinions. I remember particularly during the election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and there was just two students who had a different opinion of who they wanted to vote, and everybody just kind of talked about, you know, what their vibe was, not saying how could you want to vote for that person or things like that, because, you know, they love and respect each other in there, and I love and respect them as well. So I also would not, you know, throw that upon them either. And I don't think that's happening. I know it got out of control with, you know, politicians deciding that we got to stop the CRT stuff, but it's just like, they must not have been in any classrooms ever. Like, it's just like, I don't know if a student, and I've known a ton of students in my time between my club, which is massive, and my classroom, just never even know of a student who like left school saying, I'm so sad because we learned about the Trail of Tears, or I'm so sad because we learned about the Holocaust and I'm German. Like, just these things aren't happening. I have no idea how they feel that they are, you know.
Yeah, I think, you know, this idea that somehow teachers are, you know, indoctrinating their students, it seems so far from the truth. And I think like you said, 99%, like maybe there's one teacher who's doing that or something, but the vast majority of teachers want to have those conversations, help kids develop that critical thinking, and just to know how to dialogue. That's one of the beautiful things about a classroom, is how to be in dialogue with each other and in community with each other.
We have so many things on our plates and so many worries for our students. The last of our worries is, I wonder if they'll one day grow up to be a Republican or a Democrat. It's never on any of our minds. It's kind of ridiculous that a lot of people think it is.
Yep. Well, so you guys are seasoned educators and you are committed to building that community in your classroom, bringing all the voices in. For teachers who are new or just starting or feeling uncomfortable because of all the stuff that's going on in the state of Arizona and really across the nation, what kind of advice would you give to teachers who are kind of feeling this and it is maybe impacting their classrooms?
I tell a lot of teachers to try and apply for and get on curriculum writing teams, because I think that makes people feel more comfortable knowing that, like, when I, you know, put together a curriculum, it's sent to our governing board and they have to approve it, you know, and so then you'll know that you are teaching something that your district is behind, right? So if they have an issue with it, they're going to let you know. And so I tell people to do that, because that could perhaps make a person feel better. I do think time in the classroom is the best, right? I don't know of too many, you know, really veteran teachers who are really extra stressed about this, because we've gone through so much as educators, you know. But I'll tell people, try and get on curriculum writing teams, you know, try to figure out some leadership stuff so that you can get to know, you know, a lot of the people with lots of influence in your districts, because those people will make you feel comfortable and those people will let you know the vibe, right? And in our district, Kristen works in my district as well. In our district, I think we know, it's like, oh, our people are behind us and they are not kind of on the side of the folks who are really worried about CRT. I mean, you know, everybody has to follow the law, but that's not on their mind. But, you know, if you're a young person who just, you know, you're just in your classroom, you don't get to feel the vibe of your district and your school, you might be extra worried. But when you get to know the vibe, you might say, okay, this may not be the place for me, or this is the place for me, and they have my back and I feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's so important. So when you say that you get on a committee, you come up with the curriculum, and then the governing board, is that the school board for your district? What's the governing board?
Yes.
Who okay?
So
who
they
okays it?
they okay all the curriculum. Yeah.
The school board.
Mhm.
Yeah. Which is why it's super important for people who really are committed to public education to be on our school boards. And it's something I think that kind of falls through the cracks sometimes, but one of the things that Save Our Schools does is really tries to underscore just how incredibly important it is to run for school board and to have people on the school board who actually have kids who go to the school or have kids or have some sort of connection or commitment to public education, because we occasionally get people on school boards who do not. And so for anybody listening who's interested in that or has a commitment to public education, running for your school board is just a great, great thing to consider. So Yasmin, any advice you would give teachers who are feeling a little bit uncomfortable about this?
Yes, I'm fairly new to teaching, so
Okay.
I have great advice, and it's ask for forgiveness after the fact. I answer any questions my students have. I never leave them unanswered. I just feel like that's your first step. Answer any questions. It's you and your relationship with your students. Um, when your door is closed to your classroom, it's you and those kids in elementary all day. It's you and them. So I, ask for forgiveness, like after the fact, end of the school day, like, oh, um, this happened like 2 weeks ago. One of my students asked me, are there people who are born boys and girls? Do they have both parts? And like, well, yes. And then I explained it scientifically, but then I told my principal, like, if you get a phone call, I had this discussion in class, I had to answer the question. I can't not answer it. And I think that's your first step as a new teacher. If you just 100% focus on those kids, your first class ever, you in your classroom, like sometimes you even have to remove yourself from like your teammates, because too many voices can like lead you astray. And sometimes, just have that lunch by yourself or do lunch bunch with your students. Just focus on them can really help you not have to put so much emphasis on all the outside stuff. Yes,
Yeah.
it'll come into play, but that's what staff meetings are for. That's when you can think about it. You and your kids, that's my biggest advice to new teachers. It's just your kids, creating the lessons for them, using your curriculum with them, thinking about them when you're writing your lesson plans. It's just you and those students.
Awesome. Kristen, what about you?
Yeah, I have I think two main pieces of advice that I would love to share. And one is something that the teachers I know, and probably most of the teachers out there are already doing. But, if you're just entering the profession and you're wondering, where should I focus? Spend time investing in the relationships that you build with your students' families, their parents, their caregivers. You'll probably have some of their siblings who over the years you've taught before, and cousins and things like that. When their families know you and they understand that you know their children and that you are seeking to know them more, I think that gives a really great foundation for trust. I've heard a lot of parents say that, well, I haven't heard a lot of parents that come to me, but that have been testifying for some of these bills, that they're worried about teachers asking their students about their background information, that they're asking them how they're feeling in a certain day. And, I think that they're wondering, what are we doing with this information? And we just, we want to be able to support learning. And learning is based on who we are and what we're interested in and what our strengths are, so that we can build on those rather than just kind of looking at these, one size fits all approaches. So really get to know your families, build trust there. And then the second thing that has helped me tremendously is to find a way to stay informed. When you listen to the news, talk radio, even a school board meeting, which I would encourage everyone to attend their local school board meetings, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of power though that comes from reading bills that you're afraid might change your practice. For example, the bill that didn't end up going into effect, but that was pushed into the budget, about divisive topics. I had several colleagues who reached out to me very worried, and I sent them the text of the bill and I said, hey, do you do any of these things? And they were appalled. They're like, no, of course, I never tell my students what to feel. I never say that one race is superior to another. And I said, yeah, you don't. So please don't be intimidated by this. Understand what's out there. Know that what you're doing is right for your students, and you can feel confident in that. I think there's a confidence that comes from being informed.
Yeah. I just dropped a link into the chat. One of the things that Save Our Schools Arizona does in our advocacy for public education is exactly that, tries to keep people informed. And it's hard because just looking at education related bills alone at the legislature could take all your time. But what we do at Save Our Schools is have people monitor the House Education Committee hearing, the Senate Education Committee hearing, and then take all that information and whittle it down into a paragraph or so about each bill, with analysis of what it's about, with links to the language of the bill. So you can click on the link and go read it for yourself, or links to articles about the bill. And so it's a really great way to track what's going on related to education in Arizona. So anybody who's interested in that, I dropped that link in. You can sign up to receive that email. We send it out weekly. So let's see. I guess, so Kristen, you brought up one of the things that I was thinking about asking about, and I think the way you described sort of getting to know parents, maybe you have a kid, a student, and then you have their brother, a few years later, whatever, like that kind of sense of a community school where you're connected not only to your students, but to your community, to their families. I think that kind of model of education, which is the one I grew up in, where, it was the neighborhood school down the street, is important, because what we hear in the news is a lot of information about parents just, screaming and yelling, oh my gosh, they're trying to indoctrinate my kids and do all these things. But if they actually saw what was happening in classrooms or talked to the teachers, they would have a different story or a different perspective. So is there anything else that we could help parents understand? Like, what is it that parents are missing that makes it more difficult for you all to do the job that you would like to be doing with your students? So any thoughts on that? Kareem, what about you?
Well, I would say that if they can, I know it's tough sometimes, but just to be really involved in school, because what it winds up doing is as the parents become like stronger parts of the school community, they are kind of on the front line of defending the teachers. And that's what, we don't have a lot of times around the country. I won't say in my school district actually seems to do pretty well, but around the country, it seems that there's kind of a lot of parents coming in frustrated because they hear about CRT type stuff. It would be nice if more parents got to understand it's like, well, that's not happening. They're loving our students and doing the best job they can. And my students, when we went virtual, they all had to have someone with them. My students couldn't just access the internet quite so simply. So their parents or siblings were sitting with them during all our lessons, and cameras were on and all of the things. And they got such a good sense from that I feel like no matter what I say now, they're just like, yeah, you're the greatest, because they saw the work, that was being put in. And I feel like if more parents were like stronger parts of their school community, they would do that. I remember kind of like, even for Red for Ed, the parents who were there were the parents who were really tapped into the school, because they knew like, oh no, teachers are doing a good job. They're not just like lazy and want more money or something like that, right? And I think that would be the case with what's going on now. It's like, oh no, we're in the classrooms, and what they're teaching is fine, and we know they have the best interests of our kids in heart. So they kind of, we need to extend kind of our classroom communities to be, communities within the whole families of the students that are classes. I know it's tough because most people don't have, I just have 30 students total, where a lot of like high school teachers have 150 students or so. So, they'll be tough, but, grabbing as many as possible into the fold and, communicating with them in a way that works for them. Like I use like Class Dojo, and it works because it automatically translates for me and things like that. And those parents are just tapped in right now. And they are now saying, no, we want to defend these teachers. They're doing great. And it's just that, schools and parents have not been as connected as maybe they could.
Well, I love hearing that being on Zoom actually led to something good. You hear so many people, complaining about how, and it was difficult for sure, but as a way to allow the parents to kind of peek into your classroom, that's awesome. That's awesome. So Annika, let me toss it back to you.
Sure, absolutely. So I want to let all attendees know we had some questions. You are yourself not seen and heard, so don't worry if you're sitting in your pajamas. I hope you're sitting in your pajamas relaxing. But you can drop questions into the Q&A function and we will pose them. So please do that. Anything is welcome. I had a question just based on something Kareem said. The legislative wrangling is not in your top 5 worries, even for your students. And so it made me wonder, what do you all wish that Arizona was talking about if they were talking about K-12 education? Like the conversation about CRT is what's dominating, but what do you wish the conversation was around K-12 public ed? Ira.
Can I go first? I think we need to be talking about literacy. My dissertation is focusing on that, connecting parents back into the classroom with the older students, because I am noticing that as our students get older, the literacy gaps get larger. And I don't know if you see that in 9th grade, Kristen, that my 4th grader gets to you, and by that time it's just so wide that you can't access complex text, you can't access curriculum, and so I think we should go back to literacy. I wish that were the focus currently.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I do see that. It's very normal for me to have students beginning the year, some at 11th grade reading level, some at 2nd grade reading level, and we just, we make it work and differentiate, and everybody might not end up in the same place, but they end up growing. But something that I'm deeply concerned with is teacher retention in Arizona. Like I think Dr. Kirsch and Kareem mentioned, we are seeing teachers, we've always had this problem in Arizona. It's been true for years, and we are seeing teachers leave more than ever now. And I will be perfectly honest, I love teaching. It is, I feel like part of my identity and what makes me me and what gives me purpose and joy in life. But I have thought about leaving for the first time in my career, and that makes me really sad. And it has nothing to do with my students or my colleagues, but simply with all of the demands that I feel like are impeding me from being able to do my job. So, not enough staff being there, more students in the classroom, so that I know that, if I didn't have this many kids, I could really meet the needs of so-and-so better. And I know that I've done it in the past when I had a smaller class, or when I didn't have, to spend my prep subbing. And it hurts me when I go home to know that there was more that I could do, but I just didn't have the capacity. I didn't have the time, the bandwidth, or the resources. And that's really demoralizing to feel like there was more I could have done for my students, but all of this extra stuff that doesn't matter got in the way. So I think we really need to find ways for teachers to feel effective again, to be able to enjoy learning with our students and celebrating that. And part of that, of course, does have to do with the funding and resources I worked in a different school for the first 8 years of my career, and I loved it. It was just a wonderful, beautiful school and the best place to work. And I left in part because after 8 years there, I had never received a raise, and I was behind on my student loans and didn't think I would ever be able to pay them. And so that's when I left. I was teaching middle school and moved up to high school, where the funding is a little bit better. And a lot of that funding also, I think we need to talk about poverty and the things that students who come from neighborhoods of poverty might not have, that impedes their learning, you know, or not impedes their learning, but they're missed out on some opportunities that other students have not. If you're coming to school, you know, caring for 7 brothers and sisters and making sure that they get to school on time, you might come late all of the time. If you're coming to school hungry, you know, if you're coming to school and the lights were turned off last night, there's a lot that's going on that we can help our students with. We have the community resources, we just don't have enough. You know, we've got the connections, and we need to be able to close some of those gaps for our students to really see them excel.
Kareem, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the same. It is. I can't see how we're not talking about how many classrooms don't have a certified teacher in it, and how we are bleeding educators at a higher rate than we already had been, because, like Kristen said, it had already been happening, but it's really out of control, and I don't know how that's not top priority.
Right. Sorry, Sharon, you're.
If I can just hop in there, even before the pandemic, we had in Arizona about 70,000 kids who showed up at a classroom every single day, not knowing who was going to be at the front of the room. So sometimes it was a long-term sub, sometimes it was the person from the office because they couldn't get anybody else, sometimes they combined classrooms. And so I feel that way too. Like, how do we get up every morning knowing that there are tens of thousands of kids in our state who just not only don't have a certified teacher, they don't have any teacher. And then there are about double that who don't have certified teachers, even though every single study for decade after decade says the number one factor in student success is a qualified, experienced, certified teacher at the front of the classroom. So I couldn't agree with you guys more. And we know it's a problem. We should be talking about it every single day until it's solved.
May I chime in? My teaching career actually started, I was a long-term substitute. So and then I was like, I really love this, and went to the master's program to become the certified teacher, you know, fix my deficits. But I didn't realize how it's seen from someone who has been in the field for so long. I've only been teaching for 4 years, including my long-term sub year. So I guess I don't feel the burnout or notice it because my school district has a lot of like recently graduated teachers. And we recruit them. We have a program with the Wisconsin School Lacrosse. So they come and they visit for a semester, and then if they like it, we offer them a position once they graduate. So I hadn't noticed that this was a long-term problem. So thank you for pointing that out to me. I appreciate this discussion.
Claudia, yeah.
Yeah, I have really 2 questions, but the first one is really, if you were in charge and you could significantly make a difference because you had enough power or money or anything else that you might think it takes, what would you do? How would you do it? I mean, because changing the classroom is one part of it, obviously. But to protect your students and to really be able to take care of your students, many other things have to happen. So in this perfect world where you have power, how would you make it happen? Which in essence is, what can we do as parents to support you? What can higher education do to support you? What can we do? What would you have us do? Not that we have power, other than giving you Sharon, of course. But what would you do? What do you see as needed and doable?
Well, I think competitive salary would be number one. I think it's really interesting in a world of, we are, we believe in the, the free markets and capitalism and all the things. And it's like, well, there's this really, really important job out there and everybody's leaving it and no one wants to go into it. And everybody talks about how they need more money. Why isn't that happening? Because that could potentially help with the pool of candidates. And I feel like I've had so many conversations with teachers where they were like, what if they were like, the only way we can make like teacher salaries really competitive, everybody was nationally board certified or something big that, and I was like, teachers would do it, but I was like, and you would get the best and brightest. But without it, that's going to continue to be a thing because obviously life isn't getting any cheaper, but teacher salaries aren't getting any higher. And so those two things don't work well together. And I feel like that's step one, that can be done. It's just not, for whatever reason. And it seems like I don't see it changing too quickly in the horizon, but if I had power, that's what I would do.
Yeah, I'll follow up and completely agree. My second and third request, I think, would be number one, smaller class sizes. And then number two, more time to plan, prepare, and collaborate with other teachers. When I was student teaching back in Dearborn, Michigan, 16 years ago, we had a schedule where we had 2 periods a day without students. One of those was just your regular planning period, make your copies, do your grading, all of the stuff that we usually do. And another one, depending on the day of the week, was either for a grade level team planning, for working on curriculum with your content area, or for really talking about students with the other teachers who teach your same students. So it was a middle school model, and looking at how they're doing in one class versus another. And I can't tell you how well oiled that machine was and how many needs we were able to meet because we were working as a team. We were able to plan excellent, engaging lessons and then use our personal time to get our grading done and then go home and rest so that when we came back to work the next day, we didn't feel like we had just left and we didn't get any sleep the whole night and we're up all night worrying about, all of the things we had to do first thing in the morning.
I think one thing too is to have more like scholarships available. I know we have the Arizona Teachers Academy that would support your master's or even doctoral program if you commit to teaching in Arizona for the next 10 years. So I know that's a big commitment for a lot of people. But if we had other types of scholarships available, we'd have more that would kind of fix the certified teacher deficit we see, and it would kind of maybe incentivize, hey, come to Arizona, teach maybe not 10 years, but 5, 3. That would help too.
Claudia, can I answer your question too?
Of course.
Because I love dreaming about what a fully funded public education system would look like. And in Arizona, it would look like getting us at least to the middle of the pack. It would be great to have us number one for teacher pay. I guess if I were really in power, I'd put us right up to number one, but being a little more realistic, all of the different metrics, I would want us at least at the middle of the pack. So what that means in Arizona is instead of passing propositions every year that put a little Band-Aid on, and, you know, it sounds like a lot of money, almost $1 billion, but the fact of the matter is we are $3.5 billion short every single year since the economy tanked in 2008. So if we actually prioritized public education, actually spent what our students deserve, what our state deserves, what our educators deserve, then we would move to the middle of the pack for teacher pay, we'd have all kinds of support services. Like, we're supposed to have one counselor for every 250 students. But in Arizona, because we're the worst at many, many things, we have one for every 900 students. And we have so much poverty in our state. And we know that teachers and classrooms can be a place to help meet those needs. But our students need to be supported. So I would put more counselors, I would pay people more, I would have legislators who really wanted our public schools to be great. And I would have our families involved, and it would be amazing. And our state would thrive and our kids would thrive. And I can almost see that, but we need to elect educators who will fight for our public schools and prioritizing public education.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful dream. And I think a lot of the times what people don't understand is that with a good education level, you know, if the state's level goes up, it's attractive. It's attractive for people to come to a state where the education is good. It's attractive for them. The housing market goes up if you have a good education system and you rank high. It impacts everything. Absolutely.
So we have, I don't want to interrupt, but we have two wonderful questions in the chat, in the Q&A. And so I want to make sure so thank you so much. So we have a question from Francine. She says, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. Do you have any sense that Arizona's neglect of the crucial issues you describe, you know, that we just talked about, in favor of this hysteria over CRT is a strategy to make public schools fail? And Francine says, or am I wondering that, am I imagining a more organized resistance to public schools than actually exists in the legislature? Or is this a strategy? What do you guys think?
Well, I definitely think it's a strategy, because you know, when you think about it logically and rationally, and a lot of the people who started talking about it, including former presidents and Congress people, right? They understand that CRT is not being taught in schools, and kind of just coming after it. It was there, you know, there was then a coordinated attack against social and emotional learning as well. And so it is just that. It is frustrate, you know, make people leave, make sure there aren't enough counselors, social workers, et cetera, and just kind of a systemic dismantling until people have to go to private schools, charter schools, et cetera. So yeah, it seems that way to me as well. I mean, I don't have the fact, I haven't seen the playbook, but it's feeling really like it seems like there's not much of an explanation. Now, I do think a lot of people on the ground, so a lot of the times, you know, the parents who are, you know, yelling at meetings, or even the non-parents who are yelling at meetings about how kids are being indoctrinated and things, they may not all be hip to that game, but I do think, you know, where that all started is that it is, let's find more cracks in the armor of public ed and go ahead and finish it.
Right.
I completely agree. And I appreciate the wording of the question, because sometimes it does seem like no one could really be doing that. Like, really? But yeah, I see it too. Sharon might have remember better this article that I'm referring to, because I can't quite remember where it was published, but it was maybe a year ago. And it talked about how, you know, a journalist, you know, did this research on critical race theory and decided to really like throw this out there as bait, because just the words would be inflammatory to a certain, you know, political faction, that they could use that to then manipulate votes, manipulate the conversation, and ultimately push what we've seen to be a push in Arizona for many years, and that's the push to privatize education. forgetting that this is a common good and that strong communities, are centered around strong schools. Instead, we see this effort and so many others to chip away at our schools, at our communities, to push for things like vouchers, unregulated charter schools, versus like more accountability, and just ultimately, see if we can put the nail in the coffin of public education.
Wow.
And I'll just chime in and add a little bit more. I'm just about to drop a link into the chat for people who are interested. But it very much is a strategy to dismantle public education nationally. And when I got involved with Save Our Schools, I didn't know that. They were just passing a voucher bill that was going to take public money away from our public schools to fund private education. And I'm like, why are they doing that? Because I have to like buy copy paper for my kid's school in February because they run out. Like, why in the world would they expand this program and take this money away from our public schools? Well, it turns out that they've been doing this for decades. So it's Betsy DeVos's American Federation for Children and the Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity. And they have spent decades very systematically, very incrementally dismantling public education. And they've used Arizona as a kind of petri dish for this and for these laws and for these voucher schemes, because our legislature has tended to be Republican on both the House and the Senate. And there are some Republicans who support public education in our legislature. And I come from a family of Republicans who supported public education, right? So it's not a partisan issue. The vast majority of people in Arizona, every single poll, again and again, people, any independents, Republican, Democrat, they support public education. They want that school down the street to be a really strong community school. But the very, very wealthy powers that be have been working to dismantle our public schools. So I'll drop a link into the chat. It's an 8-part series, a blog that we did that talks about selling school choice, that talks about the racist roots of private school vouchers, because this all comes historically out of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And what these school choice things lead to is just more white flight and more segregation. So for anybody who's interested, look for that link and I'll drop it in now.
It's kind of a segue to another question we have in the Q&A from Miriam, who says, what's the best way for citizens who aren't parents or related to these schools in a personal or professional way to change conversation? Because voting doesn't seem to be enough. So I take this to be a question about how to, if CRT is a distraction, how to shift conversations back to conversations about retention, about funding, about class size. I don't know, do our panelists have this a big question, but
I'd be happy to jump in. I love that question, and thank you so much for that, because that is exactly what we need. We appreciate, voting and civic engagement, but there is more that we can do to come together to combat this attack on public education. We can call and email our lawmakers. We can talk to our friends and family about bills that we're hearing about and about what are the real issues in our public schools. We can go to the Capitol and testify. Every Arizonan can do that. You just sign up online, show up and speak. You can find someone who might be running against a person who's voted against public education. You can support their campaign through volunteering or donations. And even just, I think the biggest thing is word of mouth. Let's start having these conversations with our neighbors at the mailbox, or, the people we pass by when we're walking our dogs. That's just me. I know every dog in the neighborhood. Let's just start this conversation. Let's be brave enough to bring it up in real life. Because like Sharon said, what we're going to find is the vast majority of people support strong public schools. And pretty much everybody you talk to out there cares about kids and the common good. And if they don't understand the issues, we can talk to each other about that. We can find common ground, and we can start to change, the narrative that's being pushed by extremists and is starting to get confusing for the everyday person.
That's great. Thank you.
I also still think we need to organize better. When we talk about like voting doesn't help, like we do not have a pro-education legislation in Arizona, so we haven't done that right yet. And so
Right. Okay.
it could help if we figured out better ways to organize, right? It's kind of, I think there's places where you've seen it, right? It's like, oh, how did Stacey Abrams get the job done in Georgia or whatever? And you see that and say, well, maybe we have not done that right. Because if we did that right, it would be a different conversation right now. We wouldn't be one of the states. Now, granted, it's a national problem, but we wouldn't be one of those states that has bills that can pass like that.
As we're on Zoom, I'm always trying to make sure I haven't missed anyone. Are there any other questions attendees want to throw into the chat, or Sharon or Claudia, burning questions you feel like you want to ask? I don't want to cut anyone off. No.
Annika, while we're waiting for any other questions, I'd love to just, throw this opportunity out there. I do organize a community action team in the West Valley, and there are teams across the state through Save Our Schools Arizona, and we get together and we work on these issues. We talk to each other, and we're a great mix of parents, grandparents, educators, and even some students who all have different experiences. And when we talk together, we really understand the issues better, and then we can come together to take action. And so I think it's really empowering. Kind of helps with some of the angst that comes from experiencing and living through these attacks. But also, I think, to Kareem's point, it can be a great step forward with getting better organized and getting everybody to the ballot, and making sure that when we do vote, we understand who these people are, that are on our ballot and what they stand for.
That's wonderful. Well, I don't see other questions. Claudia and Sharon, I think it's in some ways a wonderful note to end on, to give strategies for connecting, organizing, communicating, and perhaps have different conversations than the conversation that has been happening. We thank you so much. I want to say thank you to Kareem, to Kristen, to Yasmin. Thank you to Sharon. Dr. Villegas-Silva and I are so pleased you all came out to hear this important discussion. And I'd be remiss if I didn't remind folks that we are showing a really amazing play on Sunday afternoon that's great for kids 12 and up. So those in the audience who have kiddos or nieces and nephews or siblings who would want to attend, that's Sunday at 1. And thank you all so much. We so appreciate this. And Claudia, am I forgetting anything?
I think we have one more question. Am I wrong? Did I miss that?
Oh, no, there is a question.
And then
I apologize.
For the play on Sunday, it is for adults as well. It's a very good play. Please come. You will enjoy it. Okay, and then there's a question.
Oh, there is a question. Okay, so I won't let you go. You thought you were getting out early, but you're not. None of you are. So our last question is there any advice you could give to professors who train future teachers? I know that's some of our audience, to handle the political and funding environment. So if we have students who are education students in our classrooms, what should we be teaching them to handle this?
I think that's pretty tricky, as students are not yet even in the job, but I would suppose encouraging them to when they get on campus, get to know the people on their campus, the organizations on their campus, the people who are advocating for education, just talking to them about that. As far as the funding environment, I don't know, what you could tell students who are going to be, to help with that, other than for them to be another voice if they're not already. But in terms of like the political environment, it's kind of get involved on your campuses, because I can't imagine many schools don't have a lot of folks on campuses that are involved politically, because it's so important to the students in their classrooms,
Thank you.
I would have loved in my teacher prep program, which was many, many years ago, so this might be happening now, but I would have loved to have an assignment where, you go to a board meeting and you start following the policies in your district, or you watch an education committee at the legislature. And I think, and I heard this from so many teachers, and even in myself as well, after, the Red for Ed movement, when so many of us were down at the Capitol, like, okay, I knew, how a bill became a law, but I didn't know it looked like this and sounded like this. And this is not at all what I pictured. So I think it's really empowering to have that firsthand experience, to understand how those policies get made, and to have that visual in your head.
Wow, that's super helpful. Thank you. I was thinking, teach them to write op-eds too. That, I don't know how, which is I think not a thing we are doing enough in the classroom, I think.
I always tell my students that I know they all want to change the world, but the only way to change the world is to put yourself in a position of power. That if you want to change, you have to put yourself in a position. And I teach a lot of Latinos, and a lot of the times that's not where they're comfortable. But somebody has to step up. You want change, you got to step up.
I actually had the pleasure of working with Dr. Villegas for my a bachelor's program, and she told me that, and I will never forget. And one day, maybe you'll see me as a superintendent.
Okay, do we have any other, I'm sorry, I missed that last question. Any other questions from folks who have attended? I know we said till 9, but that's crazy for a Zoom. That's too long for everyone. Okay, so I really will just thank everyone. Thank you so much, our panelists. This was wonderful. We appreciate you so much. And thank you all for attending. And if you're interested in seeing a play Sunday, register and you'll get the link and you'll be able to watch and enjoy. And thank you all, and have a wonderful night, and stay safe and stay well.
Tell your students.
Yeah.
I'm just fully going for it. Okay.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.